Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange, and the host who might be a southern gentleman. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels throughout the Civil War South. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about a short story that focuses on the Civil War and an execution that may or may not go as planned. I am, of course, talking about An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. I seem to have picked an excellent author today. I didn't know much about Ambrose Bierce beyond this book. Just because, not really exposed to him a lot. I felt the same way last week when I talked about Washington Irving. I knew of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, but I didn't know about the person themselves, which is, interesting. And I had the same effect where, I feel really strongly about An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, just because it's well executed on Ambrose Bierce's part, much like Sleepy Hollow was well executed on Irving's part, in my opinion. For those that don't know about Ambrose Bierce, he was a journalist, fiction writer, who wrote a lot of short stories and was very prolific in his time. He lived from the 1840s to about 1913, and people don't really know when he died, because the unusual thing about Ambrose Bierce is he was covering the news and Mexico for the Mexican Revolution in 1913, and he just disappeared. There's some rumor that he was in amongst some rebels and he got executed by firing squad, but nobody really knows for sure. It's just a lot of speculation because, not a lot of detailed records at that time. Ambrose Bierce, no real date of death. They just say 1913. What's interesting, though, is An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge was published posthumously, however you say that. It along with a bunch of other work. So he's very prolific after his death. And, I've talked before about how, it's very weird to publish people's works after their death. It feels kind of exploitative. That's another issue entirely that maybe I'll talk about on its own sometime. So he, a very prolific journalist dude, wrote a lot, seems like a swell dude. So let's talk about An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I'll talk about the summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So the story starts with a little narration of what's happening at Owl Creek Bridge on a certain day. The narrator talks about specific movements of Union troops, and right down to the saluting. He just talks about how the Union troops have a force at Owl Creek Bridge during the Civil War. The narrator then moves on to talk about Peyton Farquhar. He is a civilian plantation owner who, upon receiving news of the Union's whereabouts, he decided to go try to do some sabotage, disrupt Union operations at Owl Creek Bridge, possibly burning down the bridge or blowing up the bridge, something like that. He was very loyal to the secessionist cause, and he ultimately got captured, and so he's been sentenced to hang on this day. Lucky for him, the rope breaks at Owl Creek Bridge. So when they go to hang him, he just falls into the river, and he's being shot at by cannon fire and marksmen, but they miss, and so he manages to get to the shore and run away. And he keeps running through, even though he's bleeding and hurting a lot, and he finally makes it to his plantation, so he gets to see his family again. However, at this point, it is revealed that this is all a dream. Ooh. And he's still on the bridge, and that's when the Union releases the rope thing again, and he's hanged. So the story ends on a very downer note, and he dies. I don't feel like that's a big spoiler because this story is so old. And you can still get enjoyment out of it, knowing what happens at the end. So in terms of analysis, there's quite a few things I want to talk about here, and all of them good. The first is the exact and impossible characteristic of the narration. The nature of the narration. There we go. It's very exact. The very beginning of the story tells of the Union movements, right down to the saluting, what's happening, what's going on, and how they're there for a hanging that day. And then the narration moves on to Peyton Farquhar, how he's going to be hanged. He manages to fall into the river and escape his thoughts, what's going on, and then finally at the end of the story he sees his family before he's ultimately hanged. So it's very exact, like a lot of specific details, which I think is good on Bierce's part, but it's also impossible narration, because you could see this as like this as an observer who's watching the hanging, or you can see this as like throughout the story, because it tells of Peyton's escape. You could view it as him telling someone else and then writing down the story later on, something like that. But given the fact that it's all a dream, how does anybody know what Peyton is dreaming? A little bit of unreliable narration there, a little bit of like wonky storytelling, because it seems like nobody can be inside Peyton's mind except for him, and he's dead. He can't tell anyone this story. And so what it seems like is there's an outside observer watching the hanging and then waxing poetic about what Peyton must have been thinking about as he was about to die. Like, oh, look at this guy, he's about to be executed. See, as he imagines that the hanging doesn't go as planned and he finally makes it home. But that it's kind of odd about that. I don't think it's a bad thing about this story. It's just an unusual aspect of the narration here. When I first read this story in high school, and I did not capture the big twist at the end until I got to the end, and then I was just like, wait, what's happening? Oh no, this is strange. But there are subtle hints about how this is a dream throughout the story. The first is that Peyton notes that the marksman who is shooting him from the bridge misses his target, and he even notes, like, it's very weird for a marksman to miss his target, especially when he's so close, as if maybe, it's dream logic right there. And also the cannon fire misses him too, and he's just like one target, so how could they possibly miss? Another thing is that the scenery is very dreamlike and beautiful. He describes he hyper focuses on the sand by describing it as diamond-like, and he goes into exotic detail about the plants. So it seems like post after the fact, like it's very dreamlike, and like maybe these don't have realistic qualities. And then at the end, he suddenly finds himself at home. Like he's walking along a path, and then he's at home, and he doesn't quite know how he got there. And the narration hand waves it by saying, "Oh, it must have been a delirium due to his injuries." And it's funny how, but if you look at it like as it is, it's very dreamlike. Like in dream world, nothing happens in a linear manner. So you could be standing here at one point, standing here at the next, and it's not exactly a linear pathway towards Peyton's home. So you should have, like, that would have been like the biggest tell, but then right after the plot twist happens. So like you don't really have too much time to dwell on that fact. It's fascinating how Bierce places those hints throughout rather than it just being a sudden twist. So the savvy reader might be able to catch it, and you can definitely catch it on the second and third reading, but maybe not so much on the first. The last thing I want to talk about is how this story is a subversion of romantic adventure literature tropes. And so typically in stories where a character is sentenced to hang and the audience wants them to escape, they typically have a very heroic person who's noble and stuff. But the protagonist here, Peyton, is a criminal. It's noted that he is very like he is a secessionist, and he was working to sabotage Union operations. So he's not really doing anything noble. He's trying to undermine the federal cause of reuniting the country. Yeah, so there's a quote which describes him perfectly and how he subverts that heroic trope. Meanwhile, he did what he could. No service was too humble for him to perform in aid of the South, no adventure too perilous for him to undertake if consistent with the character of a civilian who was at heart a soldier, and who in good faith and without too much qualification assented to at least a part of the frankly villainous dictum that all is fair in love and war. So I think that's interesting on Bierce's part that he goes out of his way to say that this civilian is actually very soldier-like and very loyal to the Southern cause, and he's willing to do anything, even if it's morally heinous, to accomplish what he wants, because it's war after all, which is how you start war crimes. So that's interesting from that perspective. Another way that Bierce subverts this is by including a thrilling escape that is usually done in that those adventure stories, the romantic adventure stories. But he twisted by showing that it's only a dream, and the end result is the character's sudden death. So he's kind of trolling those writers who would write those thrilling adventure stories with romantic heroes who managed to escape dire ends at the last minute. It's just like, yep, that's actually not realistic. The character dies here. No hope for anyone. Which I enjoy. It's a beautiful piece of trolling on his part, and it's a nice twist that puts a different spin on those kinds of stories. And the last thing I want to mention is how a lot of romantic stories or adventure stories try to romanticize war. In my undergrad, I took a Civil War class and on the American Civil War. And at the beginning of the war, many people had very romantic notions of war, possibly due to the fact that there wasn't a mainland war in America since the Revolutionary War, because most of the wars were fought on the frontier and in the West, so there wasn't anything to affect regular Americans. But the Civil War was right at home, and so people had a first chance to see that war wasn't as beautiful as the Napoleonic paintings that showed like people rushing into battle and fighting valiantly to the end. People died, the weapons were harsh and cruel, and it was not a fun little spectator sport, because some people tried to watch it as a spectator sport, and they saw the grisly part of it. So it seems to be like in league with his story, how no matter how noble you think you are, you might just end up hung, and like there's no happy ending for you in this war, no chance to prove yourself. And it's also pretty similar to the Red Badge of Courage, where the protagonist of that story sought to get their Red Badge of Courage and prove themselves in the Civil War, and they quickly found that the Civil War was not a fun time. People died, and it was there was a lot of suffering. So you see him subverting that and kind of leaning on the fact that war is not fun. There's no noble intentions, or if there are noble intentions, they're quickly lost. Those are my thoughts on An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. I'm getting a strong recommendation. I'm putting forth that out there because it's a really good story. Ambrose Bierce crafts a narrative perfectly, and the twist is worth the price of admission alone. And it's not spoiling anything to tell you it. Your enjoyment won't diminish because of that. It is in the public domain, so I will put a link to it in the description below so that you can find it and enjoy it. If you've read it before, or if you're reading it now, or you want to say something about my review, feel free to comment. I'd love to hear from you and have a discussion about this interesting short story. Until then, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we can get the Short Story Tuesday out to the masses, and that'll be quite fun. Follow me at Around the Weird on Twitter as I talk about pop culture, including literature, books, movies, and TV, and all kinds of things like that. And until next time, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Civil War-ish travels. Farewell.